I was infertile and rejected until a lonely billionaire said, "I have 7 kids. Come with me." A woman who lost everything is suddenly pulled into a world she never expected. A silent mansion, 7 heartbroken children, and a father who's drowning in guilt. At first, she thinks it's just a job, a chance to help a hurting family. But the deeper she steps into that house, the stranger things get. The kids won't speak, the father won't smile, and the whole place feels frozen in time, until one tiny whisper shatters the silence. That's when she realizes something here is broken in ways no one warned her about, and someone out there wants to twist her kindness into a scandal big enough to destroy them all. So when the billionaire begs her to stay, with those 7 kids clinging to her, she faces the choice that could change every life in that home. Will she walk away from the only family that ever needed her, or step into a role she never thought she deserved? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Marina gently adjusted Mr. Peterson's blanket, tucking it around his restless hands. The elderly veteran's eyes darted around the room, searching for threats that existed only in his mind. She recognized that distant, haunted look, the same one her father used to get near the end. "You're safe here, Mr. Peterson," she said softly, her voice as smooth and warm as honey. "Remember, you're at Oakwood Gardens. It's 2:45 in the afternoon on a Tuesday." His weathered face creased with confusion. "But the shells? I can hear them falling. Those are just the wind chimes in the garden outside your window," Marina explained, pointing to the delicate metal tubes swaying in the breeze. "See? Mrs. Thompson from down the hall brought them last week. She thought they'd make a pretty sound for you." Mr. Peterson's tense shoulders gradually relaxed. "Oh, yes. Betty Thompson. She brings me sugar cookies sometimes." A flicker of recognition crossed his face, anchoring him back to the present. Marina smiled, her heart warming at this small victory. "That's right. And tomorrow is Wednesday, Cookie Day." She checked his vital signs one last time, marking them in his chart with careful precision. Her shift was ending, but she never rushed these moments. Time moved differently here, shaped by need rather than numbers on a clock. Several of the other residents called out cheerful goodbyes as she made her way down the hallway. Miss Eleanor, sharp as ever at 87, caught her sleeve. "Child, you look tired today. Are you taking care of yourself the way you take care of us old folks?" Marina squeezed the older woman's hand. "I'm fine, Miss Eleanor. Just heading to my support group after this." Eleanor's knowing eyes saw right through her. "Still going to those meetings? When was the last time you actually spoke up?" Marina's smile faltered slightly. I just like to listen now. It helps, hearing other people's stories." "Hearing isn't the same as healing, sugar." Eleanor patted her arm. "But you'll figure that out when you're ready." Gathering her belongings from her locker, Marina tried not to dwell on Eleanor's words. The fertility support group met every Tuesday at 4 o'clock at the Riverside Women's Clinic. She'd been attending for 3 years now, ever since the first failed IVF attempt. Back then, she'd shared openly about her hopes, her fears, her devastating disappointment when each treatment failed. But after Marcus left, after he'd decided he couldn't handle it anymore and walked away from their 5-year engagement, she'd stopped sharing. Now she just listened, drawing comfort from other women's journeys while keeping her own pain carefully contained. The clinic waiting room was quieter than usual when she arrived. A few familiar faces nodded in greeting, but Marina's attention was drawn to movement near the entrance. A tall man was helping an elderly gentleman from a car into a wheelchair, his movements careful and practiced despite his obvious exhaustion. There was something compelling about his gentleness, the way his strong hands steadied the older man with such care. The elderly man looked up at his companion. "Son, did you see that nurse back at the care facility? The one helping that agitated veteran? Such a kind soul. Reminded me of your mother. God rest her." The younger man's expression softened for a moment before his professional mask slipped back into place. Marina recognized that carefully constructed wall. She wore one herself most days. Their eyes met briefly across the waiting room, and something electric passed between them, a flash of mutual recognition. Here was someone else who understood loss, who knew how to carry grief while still caring for others. But the moment passed, and Marina hurried to her meeting, slipping into her usual seat in the back corner. For the next hour, she listened to other women share their stories of hope and heartbreak. Some were just beginning their fertility journey, full of nervous optimism. Others, like her, carried the weight of multiple failures. A new member broke down crying while describing her third miscarriage, and Marina's hands clenched in her lap, her own memories threatening to overwhelm her. After the meeting, she drove home in silence, the radio off. Her tiny apartment welcomed her with its familiar emptiness. The space was neat, organized, everything in its place, just like her carefully ordered life. She pulled a frozen dinner from the microwave, not really tasting it as she ate at her small kitchen table. The day's events played through her mind. Mr. Peterson's confusion, Miss Eleanor's concern, the stranger's gentle hands helping his father. She thought about the way that man had looked at her, how for just a moment she'd felt truly seen. But she pushed the thought away. She'd learned the hard way not to let hope take root too easily. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Just checking on you, baby girl. Have you thought about what we discussed? That nice church friend of mine would love to take you to dinner." Marina left it unanswered. Her mother meant well, but she couldn't face another setup, another conversation dancing around the subject of children, another disappointed look when things inevitably fell apart. She was 34 years old, single, and apparently barren, not exactly what most men were looking for. She washed her dishes methodically, wiping each plate until it gleamed. The routine was comforting, giving her hands something to do while her mind wandered. Outside her window, the Atlanta skyline glittered against the darkening sky, millions of lights shining like stars. Somewhere out there, life was happening. Parties, dates, families gathering for dinner. But here in her apartment, the silence wrapped around her like a familiar blanket, both comforting and suffocating. As she prepared for bed, Marina caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her brown skin glowed with health, her curls still neat despite the long day. She looked put together, professional, calm, everything she worked so hard to project. Only her eyes gave her away, carrying a sadness she couldn't quite hide. "You're fine," she whispered to her reflection, the same words she'd said to Miss Eleanor. "You're fine, you're fine, you're fine." Maybe if she repeated it enough times, it would feel true. But as she lay in bed, staring at her ceiling, Marina couldn't stop thinking about the man from the clinic. Not in a romantic way. She'd locked that part of herself away long ago, but because of the way he'd looked at her. Like he recognized something in her, some hidden truth she thought she'd buried, deep enough that no one would notice. She rolled over, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. Tomorrow would be another day of caring for others, of being the steady, reliable nurse everyone counted on. She was good at that role. It gave her purpose, even if it didn't fill the empty spaces in her heart. But for now, in the quiet darkness of her bedroom, she allowed herself one small moment of honesty. She was lonely. Not just for a partner, but for someone who truly understood the complexity of her pain, who could see past her careful facade to the woman still hoping, still hurting, still trying to find her place in a world that seemed built for other people's happiness. The sound of a distant siren wailed through the night, and Marina closed her eyes, willing sleep to come. In her dreams, at least, she could sometimes hold the baby she'd never have, could feel the weight of a child in her arms. But tonight, even sleep eluded her, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the echoing question that had haunted her for years. Would she ever be enough, just as she was? The morning sun filtered through the windows of Atlanta's Riverside Care Facility as Marina settled at the nurse's station. Her fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard, updating patient charts while the halls remained quiet. She loved these peaceful moments before the day officially began, when she could gather her thoughts and prepare for whatever challenges lay ahead. The clock had just struck 8 o'clock when she noticed him again, the tall man from yesterday, now accompanying his father down the hallway. Marina's heart quickened slightly as she remembered the way he'd watched her with his father. Today he looked just as weary, his silver-streaked dark hair slightly disheveled, his tie slightly crooked. "Good morning, Mr. Crown." Marina greeted the elderly gentleman warmly, rising from her station. "How are you feeling today?" "Much better, dear," the older man replied with a gentle smile. "Though these follow-ups do tire me out." Marina guided them to an examination room, helping the elder Mr. Crown settle into a chair. As she checked his vital signs, she noticed his son watching her movements intently. There was something in his gaze that made her slightly nervous, not in an uncomfortable way, but as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. Just then, a commotion erupted from down the hall. Mrs. Henderson, one of their residents with advancing dementia, was having what Marina recognized as one of her confused episodes. The elderly woman's voice rose in panic, echoing through the corridor. "I need to check on something," Marina said softly to the Crowns. "I'll be right back." She hurried to where Mrs. Henderson stood in her doorway, trembling and disoriented. "My children," the woman was saying, her voice shaking. "They're waiting for me to pick them up from school. I'm late. I'm so late." Marina approached slowly, her voice gentle. "Mrs. Henderson, I see you're worried about your children. That must feel scary right now." She reached out, taking the woman's wrinkled hands in hers. "Your children are all grown up now, remember? They're safe. Your daughter Janet visited just yesterday with those beautiful pictures of your grandchildren." Gradually, the panic in Mrs. Henderson's eyes began to fade. Marina continued speaking softly, grounding the woman in the present moment until her breathing steadied. She didn't notice Damien Crown watching from the hallway, his expression intense. When Marina returned to the examination room, she found the younger Mr. Crown waiting alone. His father had been taken for some routine tests. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I'm Damien Crown," he said, his voice deep but uncertain. I wondered if I might speak with you about something." Marina nodded, maintaining her professional smile despite her curiosity. "Of course, Mr. Crown, how can I help?" He ran a hand through his hair, seeming to struggle with his words. "I have 7 children," he began, then stopped, swallowing hard. "They haven't spoken a word in 11 months, not since their mother." His voice trailed off, but Marina understood. Her heart ached at the raw pain in his eyes. "Would you be willing to meet me in the cafeteria during your lunch break?" he asked. "I'd like to explain more fully." Marina checked her watch. "I have lunch at 12:30, she said carefully. "I could spare 30 minutes. The cafeteria was half full when Marina arrived, clutching her brown bag lunch. Damien was already there, 2 coffee cups on the table in front of him. He stood as she approached, pulling out a chair. "I took a chance on regular coffee," he said, gesturing to one of the cups. "I hope that's okay." Marina settled into the chair, touched by the thoughtful gesture. "Thank you, that's perfect." For a moment they sat in awkward silence. Then Damien began speaking, his words coming faster as if he'd been holding them back for too long. "My wife Rebecca died 11 months ago," he said quietly. "Brain aneurysm. It was sudden, no warning. The children were at school when it happened. When I told them..." He paused, his hands tightening around his coffee cup. "They just stopped talking, all 7 of them." Marina listened intently as he described his children, the twins, Thomas and Timothy, age 12, 9-year-old Sarah, 7-year-old Rachel, 5-year-old Hannah, 4-year-old Matthew, and little Elizabeth, just 3. None of them had spoken a single word since their mother's death. "We've tried everything," Damien continued, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Child psychologists, grief counselors, play therapists. They go to school, they do their homework, they function, but they won't speak. It's like they're frozen in that moment when I told them their mother was gone." He looked up at Marina, his dark eyes filled with desperate hope. "I saw how you were with that confused woman today, with my father yesterday. You have this way about you. This gift for reaching people who are lost in their pain." Marina felt her chest tighten. "Mr. Crown, I'm just a nurse. I'm not qualified to..." "Please," he interrupted, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a business card. "Just think about it. The children need someone who can understand their silence, who can help them find their voices again." Marina stared at the card in her hand. The weight of what he was asking felt overwhelming. 7 children, all locked in their grief, a family frozen in time by an unimaginable loss. "I'll think about it," she said finally, tucking the card into her pocket. "But I can't promise anything." Damien nodded, relief visible on his face. "That's all I'm asking for now." When Marina returned to the nurse's station, her hands were shaking slightly. She pulled out the business card, running her fingers over the embossed letters. Damien Crown, CEO, Crown Industries. The request seemed impossible. She was a nurse, not a miracle worker. And yet, the image of 7 silent children haunted her, stirring something deep in her heart that she'd tried so hard to keep buried. Marina sat curled in her favorite armchair that evening, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold on the side table. Her small apartment felt especially quiet as she turned Damien Crown's business card over and over in her fingers. Outside, Atlanta's evening traffic hummed distantly, but inside, her thoughts were loud and chaotic. 7 children, 7 silent little souls wrapped in grief. Her cat, Jasper, jumped onto her lap, purring loudly. She stroked his orange fur absently, her mind replaying Damien's words from their cafeteria meeting. The desperation in his eyes had been real, raw, the kind of pain she recognized all too well. "What do you think, Jazz?" she whispered to the cat. "Am I crazy to even consider this?" But other words echoed in her mind, cruel words spoken 3 years ago in this very room. She could still see Marcus standing there, his face twisted with frustration after another failed round of fertility treatments. "You're half a woman, Marina," he had spat. "What kind of wife can't even give her husband children?" She pressed her palm against her chest, feeling the old wound throb. The engagement ring had been returned, the relationship ended, but those words still cut deep. What right did she have to think she could help anyone's children when she couldn't even have her own? Sleep proved elusive that night. Marina tossed and turned, her dreams filled with silent children and echoing hallways. When her alarm finally rang at 5:30 in the morning, she felt more exhausted than when she'd gone to bed. Still, she went through her morning routine with practiced precision. She fed Jasper his breakfast, watching him attack his kibble with his usual enthusiasm. In the soft morning light streaming through her kitchen window, she opened her prayer journal, pen hovering over the blank page. "Dear Lord," she wrote, her handwriting shakier than usual. "I don't understand why you've placed this opportunity before me. You know my heart's wounds. You know my limitations. 7 children who need a kind of healing I'm not sure I can offer." Her phone buzzed, interrupting her prayer. Unknown number. Marina's heart skipped when she answered, and heard Damien Crown's voice. "Ms. Cross," he said, sounding as if he hadn't slept either. "I apologize for calling so early, but would you be willing to just come see them? No commitment, just observe." Marina closed her eyes, her free hand clutching her coffee mug. "Mr. Crown, please," he interrupted softly. "They're slipping away more each day. I can see it happening, and I don't know how to stop it." The vulnerability in his voice struck something in her heart. "When?" "This afternoon. I could pick you up after your shift. The children will be home from school, and you could see them in their normal routine." He paused. "Such as it is now." Marina found herself agreeing before she could think better of it. They arranged the details, and when she hung up, her hands were trembling slightly. The day at the facility passed in a blur. Even her usually attentive care of the residents felt mechanical, as her mind kept wandering to the afternoon ahead. At 3:00, she changed out of her scrubs into the casual clothes she'd brought. Dark jeans and a soft purple sweater that always made her feel more confident. Damien was waiting in a sleek black SUV when she emerged from the facility. He held the passenger door open for her, and Marina caught a whiff of expensive cologne as she climbed in. The leather seats were heated, the interior immaculate. Everything about the vehicle screamed wealth and privilege. As they drove toward the outskirts of the city, Damien filled the silence with information about the estate and his children. "The house has been in the family for 4 generations," he explained. 12 bedrooms, though we only use 8. The twins share a room by choice. They always have." His voice softened when he spoke of the children. "Thomas and Timothy are the oldest at 12. They were always the talkers of the family, constantly finishing each other's sentences. Sarah's 9. She used to play piano for hours. Rachel's 7, and she was our little artist. Hannah's 5. She loved to dance. Matthew's 4, and he was just starting to read. And Elizabeth—" His voice caught slightly. "She's 3. She was just learning to string full sentences together when it happened." Marina noticed his use of past tense. Was used to. Loved. As if his children's personalities were already memories rather than current reality. The thought made her heart ache. The Crown estate appeared gradually through old-growth trees, a massive Georgian-style mansion with perfectly manicured grounds. Marina's breath caught at the sight. It was beautiful, but as they drove up the circular driveway, she noticed something else. Despite the afternoon sun, the windows seemed dark, lifeless. Damien parked in front of the main entrance, but before they got out, he turned to her. "They'll be watching from various hiding spots," he said quietly. "They always do when someone new comes. Just be yourself. That's what drew me to ask for your help in the first place." Inside, the mansion was even more impressive. Soaring ceilings, gleaming hardwood floors. Artwork that probably cost more than Marina's yearly salary. But there were other details that caught her trained eye. Dust on a dollhouse by the window, colored pencils scattered and forgotten under a side table, a child's sweater draped over a chair as if its owner had simply vanished mid-wear. And the silence. It pressed against her eardrums like a physical presence. Movement caught her eye, a flash of dark hair disappearing around a corner, the flutter of a dress behind a potted plant. As they walked through the grand foyer toward what Damien called the family room, Marina felt them. 7 pairs of eyes watching from various hiding spots, assessing this newest intruder in their silent world. She caught glimpses. a pair of identical boys peering down from the landing above, a small girl with copper curls peeking through banisters, a tiny face with their father's dark eyes watching from behind a curtain. None of them made a sound, but their presence filled the house like held breath. Damien led her into a large, sunlit room that should have been filled with the chaos of 7 children. Instead, it felt like a museum of childhood frozen in time. A half-finished puzzle spread across a coffee table, the edges collecting dust. A baby doll lay face down near the fireplace, its dress slightly dirty, as if no one had picked it up in months. Building blocks were scattered in what might have once been a tower, now toppled and abandoned. Marina's chest tightened at the sight. This wasn't just a quiet house. It was a home where joy had been muted, where laughter had been swallowed by grief. She could feel the weight of it pressing down, could see it in the way Damien's shoulders slumped as he looked around the room. "The housekeeper will be serving dinner soon," he said softly. Would you like to stay? See them all together?" Marina nodded, though her throat felt tight. "Yes," she whispered. "I'd like that." As they stood there, she heard the whisper of small feet retreating, the nearly silent creak of floorboards as her unseen audience dispersed. 7 children, carrying a burden of silence no child should have to bear. And despite all her doubts, despite Marcus's cruel words still echoing in her mind, Marina felt something stir in her heart, a calling she couldn't ignore, even if it terrified her. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the mansion's windows as Marina settled onto one of the plush sofas in the living room. She pulled a worn copy of The Velveteen Rabbit from the nearby bookshelf, noticing the name Sarah written in childish script inside the cover. "This was always one of my favorites," Marina said softly, speaking to the seemingly empty room. But she knew they were there, silent watchers in doorways and behind furniture. She began reading, keeping her voice gentle and warm, letting the familiar words fill the heavy silence. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day. As she read, Marina noticed small movements. The youngest, Elizabeth, crept closer until she sat cross-legged on the carpet, just within Marina's peripheral vision. One of the twins, she wasn't sure if it was Thomas or Timothy, leaned against the doorframe, his face carefully blank, but his eyes fixed on the book's illustrations. When the story ended, Marina closed the book carefully. "Would anyone like to play a game?" she asked, gesturing to the cabinet filled with board games. "I see Candyland over there. That's always fun." No one moved, but she hadn't expected them to. Instead, she stood and retrieved the game, herself, setting it up on the coffee table with methodical care. She arranged the cards and placed all 6 playing pieces at the start, just in case. Little Matthew wandered closer, his small hands clutching a set of wooden blocks. As he tried to stack them, they tumbled down with a clatter that seemed deafening in the quiet room. His lower lip trembled, but no sound escaped. "Here," Marina said softly, moving to help him. "Let's build it together." She picked up a block, placing it carefully. Matthew watched her for several long moments before placing another block on top of hers. Together, they created a small tower, Marina murmuring quiet encouragement with each addition. From the corner of her eye, she saw Grace hovering in the doorway. The teenage girl's dark hair fell like a curtain around her face, but for just a moment she lifted her head and met Marina's gaze. In that brief connection, Marina saw such profound pain that her heart clenched. Then Grace turned and disappeared up the stairs, her footsteps whisper quiet on the carpeted steps. The dinner bell rang at exactly 6 o'clock, a gentle chime that sent the children scattering like startled deer. Marina followed Damien to the formal dining room, where 7 children sat around a massive table with military precision. Their plates were filled by the housekeeper, a kind-faced woman who moved with practiced efficiency. The silence during dinner was unlike anything Marina had ever experienced. No scraping chairs, no clinking silverware, no requests to pass the salt. Just the weight of unspoken words pressing down like a physical force. Marina found herself shivering slightly, despite the room's comfortable temperature. She watched as Rachel pushed her peas around her plate, creating precise geometric patterns. Hannah methodically separated each food item so nothing touched. The twins mirrored each other's movements exactly, as if choreographed. It was like watching a perfectly rehearsed dance of avoidance. After dinner, as the children filed silently upstairs for their evening routines, Damien's father caught Marina's elbow gently. He guided her into the study, his weathered face creased with concern and something that looked like hope. "You're the first one," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "The first person they've even looked at since we buried their mother. They've had counselors, child psychologists, grief specialists, all of them just got blank stares. But they watched you today. They noticed you." Marina's throat tightened. "I didn't do anything special." "That's exactly why it worked." He paused, glancing toward a family photo on the desk, all 9 crowns, smiling and alive with joy. "But there's something you should know. The accident. Damien was driving. There was a storm. A truck hydroplaned." He shook his head. "He believes the children blame him. Hell, he blames himself enough for everyone." Marina thought of the weight in Damien's eyes, the careful way he watched his children from a distance. "How did it happen?" she asked softly. They were coming home from a school concert. Sarah had performed a piano solo. His voice caught. "The roads were slick. The truck came out of nowhere. Caroline, my daughter-in-law, died instantly." The pieces clicked into place. The untouched piano in the corner, the way Sarah flinched when anyone moved too quickly, the profound silence that blanketed everything like fresh snow. Later, as Damien walked her to her car, Marina noticed how he kept his distance, as if afraid to accidentally brush against her. His pain was a tangible thing, radiating off him in waves. Once inside her car, Marina couldn't bring herself to start the engine. The emotions of the evening pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. She thought of Grace's haunted eyes, Matthew's trembling lip, the way Elizabeth had crept closer during story time, but never quite close enough to touch. Finally, she closed her eyes and whispered a prayer into the darkness. "Lord, please. I need to know if this is where I'm meant to be. These children, they're so broken. And She swallowed hard. "I'm not whole either. How can I help them when I can barely help myself?" The night offered no immediate answer, but as she sat there, Marina felt something shift inside her, a quiet certainty that she couldn't walk away from these 7 silent children, no matter how daunting the task ahead might seem. Marina barely slept that night, her mind replaying every moment from the Crown estate. By 5:30 in the morning, she sat at her small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, watching the sun paint her apartment walls in shades of gold. Her cat, Milo, rubbed against her legs, purring softly. "What do you think, buddy?" she whispered, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. "Am I crazy to even consider this?" After her morning shift at the senior care facility, Marina found herself staring at Damien's business card. The elegant black text seemed to blur as she picked up her phone, her heart thumping against her ribs. She dialed before she could talk herself out of it. Damien answered on the second ring. "Marina." His voice held a note of hesitation, maybe even hope. "Yes, She took a deep breath. "I'll do it. The 2-week contract, I mean, to help with the children." The relief in his exhale was audible. "Thank you. I can't tell you what this means to us." They arranged for him to come to the clinic during her lunch break to handle the paperwork. Marina spent the rest of her morning checking on her elderly patients, her mind drifting to 7 silent children and their grief-stricken father. At 12:15, Damien arrived at the clinic, looking somehow both imposing and vulnerable in his tailored suit. They sat in a small conference room, the fluorescent lights humming overhead as Marina reviewed the contract terms. 2 weeks, afternoons and evenings, she confirmed, watching him initial each page. His hands were steady, but she noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way he seemed to hold his breath. "If you need to extend," he started. "Let's see how these 2 weeks go first," Marina said gently. She remembered the seniors in her care facility, how many of them had mentioned having old children's books they wanted to donate. "Would it be all right if I brought some books for the reading sessions?" Damien's eyes softened. Of course, anything that might help. That afternoon, Marina arrived at the Crown Estate with 2 canvas bags full of carefully selected books. Most were gently used, their pages softened by years of loving hands, but each one had been chosen with purpose. Stories about courage, about healing, about finding one's voice. The playroom was bathed in afternoon light when Marina settled onto the plush carpet. One by one, the younger children drifted in, drawn by curiosity or perhaps simply routine. Oliver, the 10-year-old, lounged in the doorway, trying to appear disinterested. Maya, 9, sat cross-legged near the window, while 7-year-old Emma huddled close to 5-year-old Noah. Little Eddie, just 3, clutched his worn, stuffed rabbit. "I brought some special books today," Marina said softly, pulling out Where the Wild Things Are. The familiar cover caught Emma's attention immediately. Marina began reading, her voice warm and steady, bringing Max's Wild Rumpus to life. As she turned the final page, there was a moment of complete stillness. Then, so quiet it might have been a breath, Emma whispered, "Again." Marina's hands froze on the book. She heard a sharp intake of breath from the doorway and glanced up to see Damien's father standing there, tears welling in his eyes. Emma ducked her head, pressing closer to Noah, but the word hung in the air like a miracle. The elderly Mr. Crown stepped back, disappearing down the hallway. Marina continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened, opening the book once more. The night Max wore his wolf suit. Later, after the children had gone upstairs for their evening routines, Marina found Damien in the kitchen. His father must have already told him about Emma's whispered request, because when Marina entered, Damien was gripping the counter's edge, his head bowed. "One word," he said, his voice raw. "One word in 11 months. His shoulders began to shake, and Marina realized he was crying. Silent, devastating sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and broken inside him. Without thinking, she stepped closer, offering the comfort of her presence. Damien turned to her suddenly, his face tear-streaked and desperate. "I have 7 kids." He choked out, "Come with me." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning Marina couldn't quite grasp. Was it a plea for help? A proposal of something more? The kitchen's warm light cast shadows across his face, making him look both younger and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen. Him. Marina started, but no words followed. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she found herself taking a step back, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. "I'm sorry," Damien said quickly, wiping his face. "I shouldn't have. That wasn't fair to you." Marina gathered her things in a daze, her mind spinning. The drive home seemed to pass in a blur, streetlights streaking past like stars. Her hands shook slightly on the steering wheel as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. One word, one tiny whisper from Emma had cracked open something massive and frightening and possibly wonderful. Marina's chest felt too tight, her thoughts too loud. She'd come to help these children find their voices again. But somehow, in the process, she was finding herself drawn into their world in ways she'd never expected. The sunset faded to dusk as Marina drove, her heart still pounding with the echo of Damien's words. "Come with me." She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew with absolute certainty that there was no turning back now. Marina stood in her tiny apartment at 6 o'clock in the morning, staring at her overnight bag. She'd packed it 3 times already, second-guessing every choice. The familiar walls of her home seemed to watch her, waiting to see if she'd really go through with this extraordinary step. Her cat, Shadow, wound between her ankles, purring. "Mrs. Peterson next door will take good care of you," she assured him, bending to scratch behind his ears. She'd arranged for her elderly neighbor to check on him daily, just as she'd arranged for temporary leave from the care facility. Her supervisor had been surprisingly understanding, especially after Marina explained the situation with the 7 silent children. The morning sun was climbing higher when Marina finally pulled up to the Crown estate. Her hands trembled slightly as she cut the engine. The mansion loomed before her, its windows gleaming in the early light. Movement caught her eye, small faces peering from various windows, quickly disappearing when she looked up. Damien met her at the door, looking as though he hadn't slept well. "Good morning," he said softly. "The children are waiting." Indeed they were. As Marina stepped into the foyer, she found all 7 children arranged on and around the grand staircase, watching her with those careful, guarded expressions she was coming to know. Grace sat at the very top, her long dark hair falling forward to partially hide her face. The younger ones clustered in the middle, while Oliver leaned against the banister, trying to appear casual. "Good morning, everyone," Marina said warmly, setting down her bag. "I thought we might start with something fun today. Would anyone like to show me their favorite spot in the garden?" For a long moment, no one moved. Then little Eddie, still clutching his ever-present stuffed rabbit, took 3 hesitant steps down. Noah followed, then Emma, until a small parade of children was heading toward the back door. Only Grace remained on the stairs, but her eyes followed them intently. The morning air was crisp and clean. Marina let the children lead her through the sprawling garden, noting how Eddie kept pointing at different flowers, even if he wouldn't name them. She made mental notes of each child's behavior, Maya's careful arrangement of fallen leaves, Oliver's protective hovering near his younger siblings. "These are beautiful," Marina said, stopping by a bed of late-blooming roses. "Did you help plant these?" "Mama did," came a whisper so faint Marina almost missed it. It was Noah, his small face serious. "Last spring." Marina's heart squeezed, but she kept her voice steady. She chose lovely colors. From the corner of her eye, she saw Damien frozen on the back porch, his expression a mix of hope and heartache. By mid-morning, Marina had established the beginnings of a routine. They gathered in the sunny playroom for story time, this time with Marina asking the children to point to their favorite pictures. Emma, emboldened by yesterday's breakthrough, whispered "dragon" when they reached a particularly colorful illustration. For lunch, Marina helped the household staff prepare sandwiches, cutting them into shapes that made Eddie smile. She noticed Grace watching from the doorway and held out an extra plate. To everyone's surprise, Grace took it, giving Marina the smallest of nods before disappearing back upstairs. The afternoon brought art therapy in the sunroom. Marina spread out paper and crayons, watercolors, and clay. "Sometimes," she said gently, "it's easier to show how we feel than to say it." She demonstrated by making a simple clay heart, then pressing her thumb into it to make a dent. Some days my heart feels like this. Oliver, who had been skulking near the door, drifted closer. After a moment he picked up some clay and began working it between his fingers. Soon all the children except Grace were creating something, mostly abstract shapes, but Emma made what looked like a small bird. Damien appeared periodically throughout the day, like a ghost haunting his own home. Marina caught glimpses of him watching from doorways or through windows, his expression cycling between relief, fear, and something deeper she couldn't quite name. When their eyes met once across the garden, he quickly looked away, as though afraid of what she might see. As evening approached, Marina sat at the small desk in her temporary room, carefully documenting the day's events. She noted each whispered word, each tiny gesture of trust. Noah's comment about the roses, Emma's dragon, Grace's nod. She wrote about Oliver's clay sculpture, a tight, twisted spiral that seemed to speak volumes about his contained emotions. Small steps, she wrote, but steps nonetheless. The dinner table that evening felt different from the previous night. The silence wasn't quite so heavy, the atmosphere not quite so strained. Eddie sat next to Marina, occasionally tugging her sleeve when he wanted more milk. Emma and Noah had a silent conversation through gestures and facial expressions that almost made Marina smile. Even Grace, though still silent, seemed to be watching everything with slightly softer eyes. Marina cut her chicken into small bites, aware of Damien watching her from the head of the table. The weight of his gaze carried questions she wasn't ready to answer, hopes she wasn't sure she could fulfill. But as she looked around at these 7 wounded children, she felt something shifting in her own heart, a sense of purpose, of rightness, despite all her fears and doubts. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 8 o'clock, its deep tones echoing through the house. Outside, the garden was settling into evening shadows, and somewhere upstairs a window creaked. Marina helped clear the plates, her mind already planning tomorrow's activities, determined to build on today's fragile progress. These children were starting to speak again, in whispers and nods and careful gestures. It wasn't much, not yet. But like the late roses still blooming in their mother's garden, it was a sign of life returning, of hope taking root in unexpected places. Rain drummed steadily against the windows of the Crown estate, casting a soft grey light through the breakfast room. Marina stood at the kitchen counter, arranging colourful plates and bowls while the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls filled the air. She had woken early, inspired by the cosy weather to try something different. As the children filed in, their sock feet quiet on the hardwood floors, Marina noticed how they huddled closer together than usual, as if seeking warmth. Even Grace drifted down earlier than normal, drawn perhaps by the comforting aromas or the gentle patter of rain. "I thought we might try something special this morning," Marina said softly, setting out warm drinks, hot chocolate for the younger ones, tea for the older children. "Sometimes rainy days make us remember things, good things." She placed a variety of items in the center of the table. A rainbow of cloth napkins, small jars of spices, a vase of flowers, and several objects she'd gathered from around the house. The children watched with curiosity as she arranged everything. "While we eat," she continued, keeping her voice gentle and unhurried, "you might see something that reminds you of your mama. A color, maybe, or a smell. If you want to, you can point to it." Eddie was the first to respond, reaching out to touch a yellow napkin with chocolate sticky fingers. He didn't speak, but his eyes held a spark of recognition. Marina smiled encouragingly. "Yellow was special?" she asked. Noah nodded beside his younger brother, then carefully drew the napkin closer to their plates. Emma pointed to the flower vase, specifically to a spray of tiny white blooms. Marina noticed how Damien, sitting quietly at the end of the table, seemed to stop breathing for a moment. The rain continued its soft symphony against the windows as more children began to participate. Oliver tapped a jar of cinnamon. Maya reached for a blue cup that matched her mother's favorite tea set. Each gesture carried weight, like small stones dropping into still water, creating ripples of memory throughout the room. Then Grace, who had been watching everything with those observant eyes of hers, lifted her hand slightly. Her fingers trembled as she pointed to a small bottle of essential oil Marina had included. The word came out like a whisper of wind through leaves. Lavender. Marina felt the shift in the room immediately. Damien's sharp intake of breath, the way the other children turned to look at their eldest sister. Grace hadn't spoken in 11 months, and now this single word hung in the air like a delicate soap bubble, precious and fragile. "Your mama liked lavender?" Marina asked, keeping her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. Grace gave the tiniest nod, her eyes fixed on the bottle. Marina resisted the urge to push for more, instead letting the moment settle naturally. She noticed how the other children seemed to relax slightly, as if their sister's whispered word had given them permission to feel, to remember. The rest of the morning passed in a gentle rhythm of rain and quiet activities. Marina set up art supplies in the playroom, where the children drew pictures filled with yellows and blues, lavenders and greens, colors that seemed to speak their own kind of language. When lunchtime arrived, Damien's father joined them, bringing warmth and stories to the table. He sat beside Marina, his kind eyes twinkling as he watched the children eat their soup and sandwiches. "You know," he said, just loud enough for Marina to hear, "Damien was like this once, after his mother left." Marina glanced at him, surprised. Damien had stepped out to take a phone call, leaving them alone with the children. He didn't speak for 3 months. The older man continued, buttering a piece of bread. Built walls around himself, just like these little ones, but he was hurting so badly inside. He paused, watching Eddie carefully spoon up his soup. When Sarah came along, their mother, she was the first one who got through to him. She had that gift, like you do, the ability to wait, to listen to the silence. Marina absorbed this information, suddenly understanding more about Damien's withdrawn nature, his desperate need to help his children while seemingly unable to reach them himself. The weight of his own childhood trauma, coupled with losing his wife, must have been overwhelming. Later that afternoon, Marina found herself sitting beside Damien in his car, heading to the children's school for a parent-teacher conference. The rain had settled into a steady drizzle, making the world outside look soft and blurred. "I haven't been to one of these since—" Damien's voice trailed off, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I'll be right there," Marina assured him quietly. The meeting was held in a warm classroom, but the atmosphere grew heavy as Oliver and Noah's teachers shared their concerns. The boys hadn't participated in class for months, their academic performance suffering despite their previous excellence. "They sit together at lunch," Mrs. Matthews explained, her face kind but worried. "They don't play with other children anymore. When we try to engage them in group activities, they just—" She spread her hands helplessly. Marina watched Damien's face tighten with each word. Under the table, his hands were clenched into fists. She gently touched his arm, grounding him. "They spoke a little this morning," she offered. "Well, not spoke exactly, but they participated in a memory activity about their mother. I think they're starting to open up." The teachers exchanged hopeful glances. They discussed strategies for supporting the boys, ways to ease them back into participation without pressure. Throughout it all, Marina felt Damien's grateful presence beside her, his relief at not having to face this alone. The day ended with Marina's favorite part of her new routine, tucking the children into bed. She moved from room to room, straightening covers and offering gentle goodnights. Emma wanted an extra hug. Maya needed her nightlight adjusted. Eddie had to show her his stuffed elephant one more time. As she finished with the younger ones, Marina noticed Grace's door was slightly ajar, unusual for the teenager who typically kept it firmly closed. Inside, Grace sat on her bed, holding something that gleamed in the soft lamplight. "It's her perfume bottle," Grace whispered, her voice still barely audible. She didn't look up, but she didn't pull away when Marina sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "It still smells like her." Marina's heart ached with the privilege of this moment, this tiny crack in Grace's carefully constructed walls. "Would you like to tell me about her?" she asked softly. Grace didn't speak again, but she held the perfume bottle a little tighter, and Marina understood that even this much was a gift. As she left the room, she saw Damien standing in the hallway, watching. The tears in his eyes caught the dim light, and Marina saw in them all the pain and hope of a father, desperate to help his children heal. She offered him a small, encouraging smile as she passed, carrying with her the weight of Grace's whispered word, the memory of lavender, and the feeling that somehow, in this rain-washed day, something had begun to bloom. The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect for the activities Marina had planned. She'd spent hours researching music therapy and its effects on emotional healing, carefully selecting songs that might spark memories without overwhelming the children. As she set up the portable speaker in the family room, soft classical music began to fill the space. Eddie, the youngest at 5 years old, was the first to peek around the corner. His eyes widened at the gentle notes floating through the air. Marina smiled, pretending not to notice as he crept closer, drawn by the melody. "This was one of my favorites when I was little," she said to no one in particular, humming along. Soon, Maya and Emma joined their brother, settling on the plush carpet without a word. The older children filtered in more hesitantly, Noah and Oliver taking their usual spots together, while Grace lingered in the doorway, Luke hovering near her. The music seemed to soften the sharp edges of silence that had defined the house for so long. Marina watched as tiny feet began to tap, small hands swaying slightly to the rhythm. When she switched to a lighter, more playful piece, Eddie actually bounced a little where he sat. But it was the afternoon's cooking project that truly transformed the atmosphere. Marina had set up 7 little workstations in the massive kitchen, each with a small bowl of pizza dough, bowls of sauce, and careful portions of cheese and toppings. "Okay, everyone," Marina demonstrated, her hands covered in flour. "First, we need to stretch the dough like this." She pressed and pulled gently, creating a somewhat uneven circle. It doesn't have to be perfect. That's what makes homemade pizza special. The children approached their stations cautiously at first. Emma was the first to dig in, her small hands pressing into the soft dough. A tiny cloud of flour puffed up, landing on her nose. For a moment, everyone froze. Then Eddie giggled. The sound was like a key unlocking a door. Maya joined in the laughter when Luke's dough stuck to his fingers in stubborn strips. Even Noah and Oliver exchanged small smiles as they worked. Grace, though still quiet, seemed more present than Marina had seen her yet, carefully arranging her toppings in precise patterns. The kitchen door swung open, and Damien stepped in, stopping short at the sight before him. Flour dusted every surface. Sauce had somehow made it onto the ceiling, and his children, his silent, withdrawn children, were actually enjoying themselves. "Would you like to join us?" Marina asked, holding out a ball of dough. Damien hesitated only briefly before rolling up his sleeves. "I should warn you," he said, accepting the dough. "I'm terrible at this." He wasn't exaggerating. His attempts at stretching the dough resulted in holes and odd shapes that made Eddie dissolve into fresh giggles. When he tried to toss it like a professional pizza maker, it landed squarely on his head, creating a flour-covered crown that had even Grace hiding a smile behind her hand. The kitchen filled with warmth from the preheating ovens, and something else, something that had been missing for almost a year. Joy. It bubbled up in small moments. The proud looks on the children's faces as they created their masterpieces, the way they gestured and nodded to each other, sharing toppings and trading techniques without words. As their pizzas baked, filling the kitchen with mouth-watering aromas, Marina helped the younger ones clean up, while Damien awkwardly attempted to wipe flour from his hair. The resulting family dinner was the liveliest she'd seen yet. Though still quiet, the atmosphere had shifted from heavy silence to comfortable peace, punctuated by occasional giggles and the sounds of happy eating. After the children were settled with a movie in the family room, Damien gestured for Marina to join him on the back patio. The evening air was soft with approaching spring, carrying the scent of blooming flowers from the carefully tended gardens below. "I haven't heard them laugh in 342 days, Damien said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. He stood at the stone railing, looking out over the grounds but seeing something far away. I'd almost forgotten what it sounded like. Marina stood beside him, careful to maintain a professional distance despite the strange flutter in her chest. "They're still in there," she said gently. "All those happy, loving parts of them. They're just waiting to feel safe enough to come out again. Like the house itself." Damien mused. "It used to be so full of noise, of life. Sarah would have music playing while she cooked, the kids running everywhere." He trailed off, then turned to look at Marina. "Thank you for giving me a glimpse of that again." The way he looked at her in that moment, with gratitude and something deeper, something that made her heart skip, was too much. Marina felt heat rise in her cheeks and quickly stepped back. "I should check on the children," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "Make sure they're settled with the movie." Damien nodded, but his eyes followed her as she retreated inside. Later that night, Marina sat cross-legged on the bed in her guest room, her journal open before her. The leather-bound book had been her confidant through years of loss and loneliness, and now she found herself pouring out new, confusing feelings onto its pages. "I'm in trouble," she wrote, her pen moving quickly across the paper. "These children have wrapped themselves around my heart so completely. And their father." She paused, then continued more slowly. "Their father looks at me sometimes like he sees something valuable, something worth protecting. It terrifies me how much I want to belong here, with all 8 of them." She looked up at her reflection in the antique mirror across the room. The woman who gazed back seemed different somehow. Softer, more open, more afraid. Because she recognized the feeling growing in her chest, the way her heart lifted at the sound of footsteps in the hallway, hoping they might be his. She was falling for them all, 7 wounded children and their equally wounded father, and she had no idea what to do about it. Marina closed her journal and hugged it to her chest, listening to the now familiar creaks and sighs of the big house settling for the night. Somewhere down the hall, a child coughed softly. From the garden below came the gentle sound of wind chimes. Sarah's wind chimes, she'd learned today, still singing their quiet song to the family she left behind. Marina felt caught between 2 powerful urges, to run before she got hurt again and to stay forever, helping to heal this broken family that had somehow begun to feel like her own. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the mansion's driveway as Marina helped load 7 children into Damien's large SUV. The prospect of a trip to the park had brought a new energy to their usually subdued morning routine. Even the littlest ones seemed to vibrate with contained excitement. "Everyone buckled in?" Marina asked, doing a final check of seat belts and car seats. A chorus of nods answered her, and she couldn't help but smile at their earnest faces. The park was only 15 minutes away, but the drive felt meaningful, their first family outing since Marina had joined their household. Through the rearview mirror, she watched the children's expressions change as they passed familiar streets and buildings. Their eyes grew wider, more alert, taking in a world they'd withdrawn from for nearly a year. When they arrived, the park was peacefully empty, except for a few morning joggers. The spring air carried the sweet scent of blooming dogwoods, and a gentle breeze rustled through the fresh leaves overhead. Marina helped the younger children out of the car, while the older ones gravitated naturally toward the playground equipment. "Would anyone like to swing?" she asked softly, holding out her hands to the twins, who had been clinging to each other since they'd arrived. After a moment's hesitation, they each took one of her hands, and she led them to the swings, while Damien followed with Eddie, the youngest. Grace hung back, watching from a wooden bench near the playground. Her long, dark hair fell like a curtain around her face, but Marina could see her eyes tracking her siblings' movements with protective attention. For the first few minutes, the only sounds were the creaking of swing chains and the distant calls of birds. Marina gave gentle pushes to the twins, who gradually began to pump their legs, remembering the rhythm. Eddie, secure in his baby swing with Damien nearby, let out a delighted giggle that seemed to break something open in the morning air. "Mama used to sing on the swings." Grace's voice came so quietly that Marina almost missed it. She turned to look at the teenager, who was now sitting straighter, her eyes fixed on some distant point. She'd go really high and sing "You Are My Sunshine." Her laugh. Grace's voice caught slightly. Her laugh would echo all over the park. Marina's heart squeezed at the raw emotion in Grace's voice. She noticed Damien had gone completely still, his hand frozen on Eddie's swing. "That sounds beautiful," Marina said gently. "Would you like to tell me more about her laugh?" Grace's fingers twisted in the hem of her sweater. It was like bells, clear and bright. When she really got going, she'd snort a little at the end. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Dad always said it was his favorite sound in the world. Marina glanced at Damien and saw him turn away, his shoulders tight with tension. He mumbled something about checking the car and walked quickly toward the parking lot. "Keep swinging, sweethearts," Marina told the twins. "I'll be right back." She followed Damien, finding him leaning against the SUV, his face in his hands. "Damien," she said softly. "I killed her." His voice was muffled, broken. "I killed her laugh, her songs, everything." Marina stepped closer, close enough to see his shoulders shaking. "What happened wasn't your fault. I was the one driving." The words seemed to tear out of him. "It was raining. I was tired, distracted by work calls. If I'd just pulled over, if I'd just waited." He looked up at her, his eyes red. "The truck came out of nowhere. I swerved, but—" He shook his head. "She died because I wasn't paying attention. The children know it. They must hate me." Marina's heart ached for him, for the weight he'd been carrying alone all these months. "Guilt lies to us when we're grieving," she said quietly. "It makes us believe we could have controlled things that were beyond our control. Those children don't hate you, Damien. They're hurting, yes, but they need their father. They need you to forgive yourself so they can start healing too." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Understanding, compassion, maybe something more. The moment stretched, delicate as a soap bubble, until a shout from the playground broke it. "Daddy!" It was Emma standing by the slide. "Watch me!" They both turned, startled by the clear voice calling out. Emma stood at the top of the slide, waving. When Damien waved back, she slid down with a smile that transformed her whole face. The rest of the morning unfolded like a flower opening to the sun. The children began to speak. Not much, but more than they had in months. "Higher," the twins would whisper when Marina pushed them on the swings. "My turn," Tommy said when he wanted to use the monkey bars. Each small word felt like a victory. On the drive home, Damien surprised everyone by pulling into an ice cream shop. "Sarah used to bring them here after park days," he explained quietly to Marina as they helped the younger ones choose flavors. "Can I have strawberry?" Grace asked, her voice still soft but steady. It was Mum's favorite. "Of course, sweetheart," Damien said, his voice thick with emotion. They sat at picnic tables outside the shop, the spring sun warm on their faces as they ate their ice cream. The children spoke in short sentences now, mainly to Marina. "This is good," and "thank you," and "can we come back?" That evening, after the children were in bed, Marina found Damien in the kitchen making tea. He offered her a cup, and they sat at the large island counter, the comfortable silence broken only by the gentle clicking of their cups against the saucers. "Sarah would have liked you," Damien said suddenly. "She always believed in healing through love and patience, like you do." Marina wrapped her hands around her warm cup. "She sounds like she was an amazing woman." She was. Damien's voice was soft with memory. "But today was the first time I felt like maybe we could be okay again. Different, but okay." He looked at Marina, his eyes full of gratitude, and something deeper that made her heart flutter. "Thank you for helping us find our way back to living." Marina nodded, not trusting her voice. The kitchen felt warmer somehow, brighter, as if the day's small victories had literally lightened the air in the house. When they finally said goodnight and headed to their respective rooms, Marina could feel it, the shift in the house's atmosphere, the way hope had begun to take root in its halls. As she got ready for bed, she could hear the normal sounds of a household settling down. Water running in distant pipes, floorboards creaking under quiet footsteps, the hum of the heating system. But now these sounds felt less like echoes in an empty space and more like the heartbeat of a home slowly coming back to life. The morning dawned with promise, sunlight streaming through the estate's tall windows. Marina hummed softly as she helped the younger children with breakfast, her heart light as Eddie actually asked for more orange juice, a complete sentence that would have been unthinkable just days ago. Damien watched from the doorway, a gentle smile playing at his lips, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting from contentment to concern. "Excuse me," he murmured, stepping into his office. Marina noticed the change in his demeanor, but focused on helping Emma spread jam on her toast. The kitchen bubbled with quiet conversation, a new normal they'd all been growing into. Grace even offered to help clear the dishes, another small victory. The peaceful moment shattered when Damien's raised voice carried from his office. "What do you mean, photos? When were these taken?" Marina's spine stiffened. Something in his tone sent a chill through her. Moments later, Damien emerged, his face ashen. "Marina, could you join me for a moment?" In his office, he passed her his tablet. The headline blazed across the screen. "Billionaire's grief exploited. Mystery woman moves in, targets vulnerable widower." Marina's hands trembled as she scrolled through the article. Photos from their park outing filled the page. Moments she'd thought were private, captured with cruel implications. There she was, pushing Emma on the swing, the caption suggesting she was playing mother. Another showed her and Damien talking on the bench, their expressions serious as he'd shared his grief, now twisted into intimate moments. "They're calling you a replacement mother," Damien said, his voice tight. "They're implying you're manipulating us, using the children to get to me." Tears pricked Marina's eyes. "That's not... I would never..." His phone rang again. "Mr. Crown," a clipped voice said on speaker. "This is Richard from legal. The optics are concerning. Your reputation, the children's privacy. We need to manage this immediately. I recommend distancing yourself from Ms. Cross publicly until we can control the narrative." Marina's chest tightened. She backed away from the desk, wrapping her arms around herself. "Richard, Marina has been helping us," Damien began, but his lawyer cut him off. "With all due respect, sir, you're still in the grieving period. The media is painting her as an opportunist preying on your emotional vulnerability. Your shareholders are already calling. We need to issue a statement clarifying that Ms. Cross is temporary help only, nothing more." Marina felt the walls closing in. She'd been foolish to think she could belong here, that she could help heal this family. Her ex-fiancé's words echoed in her head. Half a woman, trying to play mother to someone else's kids. Through her rising panic, she heard small feet thundering down the hallway. Grace burst in, holding her tablet. "Dad! They're saying horrible things about Marina online!" The other children crowded behind her, faces pale and frightened. "Is Marina leaving?" Eddie's lower lip trembled. "Like Mom?" "No one's leaving," Damien said, but his voice lacked conviction. His phone kept buzzing with messages and calls. Marina couldn't breathe. She slipped past the children, hurrying to her room. Her hands shook as she began pulling clothes from drawers, stuffing them into her overnight bag. Tears blurred her vision as she heard the children's voices rising in distress downstairs. Through the open window, she heard Damien on another call in the garden below. "I understand the concern," he was saying, his voice strained. "Yes, I know how it looks. No, I haven't. I mean, we haven't. It's complicated." Her heart shattered. He couldn't even defend her. Marina zipped her bag closed, wiping her eyes. She'd been naive to think she could step into this world of wealth and scrutiny, to believe she could help heal such deep wounds. The children found her as she reached the front door. "Please don't go," Emma begged, clinging to her leg. The twins were crying. Even Grace, who'd been so strong, had tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," Marina whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." She gently disentangled herself from their grip, her chest aching as their cries followed her to her car. As she drove through the estate's gates, she glimpsed them in her rearview mirror, 7 children on the front steps, calling for her to come back. Damien stood behind them, phone still in hand, looking lost. Marina made it 3 blocks before she had to pull over, sobs racking her body. She'd opened her heart to them all, allowed herself to hope for something beautiful. Now that hope lay in ruins, scattered like the autumn leaves blowing across her windshield. The tabloid's words burned in her mind. Replacement mother, opportunist, manipulator. She'd only wanted to help, to bring healing to a wounded family. Instead, she'd brought chaos and pain, pushing them back into the silence they'd just begun to leave behind. With tears still falling, Marina pulled back onto the road. Behind her, the Crown estate disappeared into the gathering dusk, taking with it the dreams she'd barely dared to dream. Marina's apartment felt like a stranger's home when she returned that evening. The silence pressed against her eardrums, so different from the lively chaos of the Crown estate. Her cat, Pepper, wound around her ankles, but even his familiar comfort couldn't ease the hollow ache in her chest. She dropped her overnight bag by the door, not bothering to unpack. The microwave dinner she heated went untouched, growing cold on her small kitchen table as she stared out the window at the city lights. 7 young faces haunted her thoughts. Emma's tears, Eddie's trembling lip, Grace's rare smile now lost again. Sleep evaded her. She tossed and turned, her bed feeling too empty, too quiet without the subtle sounds of children dreaming down the hall. When dawn finally broke, Marina dressed mechanically for work, grateful she could return to her familiar routine at the care facility. "Welcome back, honey," called Sandra from the front desk as Marina signed in. "Thought you were taking some time off?" "Plans changed," Marina managed, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She threw herself into her morning tasks with desperate energy, checking vital signs, distributing medications, helping Mr. Peterson with his physical therapy exercises. But her practiced calm couldn't fool the perceptive elderly residents who'd known her for years. "Something's weighing on your heart, child," Mrs. Eleanor Watson said during her morning check-in. The 82-year-old widow watched Marina with knowing eyes as she adjusted her blood pressure cuff. "I've seen that look before, in my own mirror after I lost my Henry." Marina's hand stilled. "I'm fine, Mrs. Watson. Just a little tired." Mm-hmm. The older woman hummed, unconvinced. She patted the chair beside her bed. "Sit with me a minute. These old bones aren't going anywhere." Maybe it was the gentleness in Mrs. Watson's voice, or perhaps the weight of keeping everything bottled up became too much. Marina sank into the chair, and suddenly the whole story came pouring out. The 7 silent children, their grieving father, the precious moments of breakthrough, and finally, the cruel tabloid accusations that had shattered it all. "I was so stupid," Marina whispered, wiping away tears. "Thinking I could help them, that I could belong there. I'm not qualified to heal a family like that. I'm not—" "Not what?" Mrs. Watson's wise eyes fixed on her face. "Not a real mother? Child, let me tell you something about family. It ain't always born to you. Sometimes God plants you where you're needed most." Marina looked up, startled by the conviction in the elderly woman's voice. "I had 3 children of my own," Mrs. Watson continued, "and 2 stepchildren I raised after Henry's first wife passed. Those stepkids? They're as much mine as the ones I birthed. Love doesn't check bloodlines, baby. It grows where it's tended. But the media, they're saying such horrible things. People always talk. Let them. Truth has a way of outlasting lies." Mrs. Watson squeezed Marina's hand. "Those children spoke to you after months of silence. That's not manipulation. That's healing. And if their daddy can't see that, well—" She clicked her tongue disapprovingly. Across town at the Crown Estate, that same healing was rapidly unraveling. The breakfast table sat silent again, 7 untouched plates of food growing cold. Grace had retreated to her room, the twins wouldn't leave their bed, and Eddie had spent the morning crying into his pillow. Damien stood in his study, Marina's forgotten sweater in his hands. She'd left it draped over a chair in the playroom days ago. The soft lavender material still held a trace of her gentle presence, reminding him of everything they'd lost. He walked through the quiet house, remembering how different it had felt just yesterday. The sound of Emma's giggles during their pizza-making adventure, the way the twins had started speaking in full sentences again, Grace's tentative smile as she'd shared memories of her mother. In the kitchen, Mrs. Chen, their housekeeper, was wrapping up the uneaten breakfast. "They won't eat, Mr. Crown," she said softly. "Not since Ms. Cross left. We're going backwards." Damien pressed his fingers to his temples, guilt and regret churning in his stomach. He'd done it again. Let fear drive his decisions. Just like the night of the accident, when he'd been too afraid to tell his wife to wait until morning to drive home from her sister's house in the storm. Now he'd let fear of scandal and public opinion drive away the one person who'd brought light back into their lives. he found himself in Marina's temporary room, now empty of her presence. The bed was neatly made, the drawers cleared out, but a small notebook had fallen behind the nightstand. Picking it up, he saw her neat handwriting documenting each child's progress. Grace made eye contact during story time, smiled twice. Progress. Eddie spoke 3 words today, asked for more juice. Emma, full sentence at breakfast. I remember Mommy's pancakes. Twins played together for first time in months. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. Marina hadn't been manipulating them. She'd been carefully, lovingly, helping his children find their voices again. And he'd let her go. Too afraid to stand up to the world and defend her. He sank onto the edge of the bed, still clutching her sweater and notebook. Through the window he could hear the autumn wind rustling through the trees, the same sound that had filled the garden during their quiet conversation just days ago. He'd felt something then, watching her gentle interaction with his children, something he'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Now the house felt colder, emptier than ever. The progress they'd made was slipping away with each silent meal, each tearful night. He'd thought he was protecting his family from scandal, but instead he'd robbed them of the healing they'd finally begun to find. The sound of muffled crying drew him to Eddie's room. His youngest son lay curled around his pillow, shoulders shaking. I want Marina, he whimpered when Damien sat beside him. She makes the bad feelings smaller. Damien gathered his son into his arms, his heart breaking all over again. I know, buddy, he whispered. I know. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Crown Industries' downtown conference room, but Damien barely noticed the spectacular Atlanta skyline. He sat rigid in his leather chair, jaw clenched, as his PR team clicked through a PowerPoint presentation titled Media Crisis Management. The tabloids are having a field day with this, Mr. Crown. Sarah Jensen, his head of communications, explained, while gesturing to projected headlines. We need to release a statement distancing you from Ms. Cross immediately. They're painting her as a gold digger, added James Morris, their crisis management specialist. Look at these comment sections. The public's already convinced she infiltrated your household to trap you. Damien's fingers drummed against the polished conference table. Each slide showed another cruel interpretation of Marina's presence in their lives. The photos from the park had been twisted into something tawdry, a grieving billionaire being manipulated by an opportunistic caregiver. Our recommended strategy, Sarah continued, is to announce that Ms. Cross was a temporary hire whose contract has concluded. We'll emphasize that. Stop. Damien's quiet command cut through the room. Sir. He stood up slowly, looking at the frozen image of Marina pushing Eddie on the swing. In the photo, his youngest son was actually smiling, the first real smile he'd shown in almost a year. Do you know what happened yesterday? Damien's voice was low but intense. My 7-year-old son cried himself to sleep because Marina wasn't there to read his bedtime story. My teenage daughter locked herself in her room again. The twins wouldn't speak a single word. Mr. Crown, we understand this is difficult, but public perception. No. He shook his head, suddenly seeing everything with crystal clarity. You don't understand. I've spent 11 months watching my children disappear into themselves. Marina brought them back. She made them feel safe enough to speak, to laugh, to remember their mother without breaking apart. Sir, the media, I don't care about the media. Damien grabbed his coat. I care about my children. He walked out of the conference room, leaving his PR team calling after him. In the elevator, he loosened his tie, feeling like he could finally breathe. He'd been so worried about protecting his family's image that he'd forgotten to protect their hearts. Across town, Marina was finishing her shift at the senior care facility. She moved through her duties with mechanical precision, trying to ignore the hollow ache in her chest. Her elderly patients noticed the change in her demeanor, the missing warmth in her smile, the slight tremor in her hands as she dispensed medications. "You're not yourself today, dear," Mrs. Watson observed as Marina checked her blood pressure. "Just tired," Marina replied softly, but they both knew it wasn't true. When her shift ended, Marina drove home in a daze, her thoughts constantly drifting to the Crown children. Were they eating properly? Had Eddie remembered to take his allergy medicine? Was Grace retreating further into herself? She climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, keys jingling in her tired hands, and stopped short. A stunning arrangement of flowers sat by her door, roses, lilies, and delicate baby's breath artfully combined in a crystal vase. Marina's heart skipped as she searched for a card, but found none. Probably from one of her grateful patients' families. She told herself firmly, ignoring the way her hands shook as she carried the arrangement inside. Her tiny apartment felt smaller than ever after the grandeur of the Crown estate. The silence pressed in around her as she changed out of her scrubs and began preparing dinner, just a simple stir-fry for one. As she chopped vegetables, her mind wandered to the Crown family's kitchen. By now, Mrs. Chen would be serving dinner. The children would be seated around that massive table, perhaps retreating back into their protective silence. Would Eddie still use the special fork she'd found that helped with his motor skills? Would Emma remember to eat her vegetables without their special game of counting colors? A tear splashed onto the cutting board, and Marina realized she was crying. She set down the knife, bracing herself against the counter as the emotions she'd been holding back finally broke free. "Lord, please watch over them," she whispered, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "Help them find their voices again." Outside her building, Damien Crown sat in his parked car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Through the gathering dusk, he could see Marina's kitchen window, the warm light spilling out into the evening. He'd rehearsed this moment 100 times on the drive over. He would apologize for his cowardice, explain how much the children needed her, tell her how she'd brought life back into their home. Maybe even admit how his own heart had started to heal in her presence. But now, staring up at her window, the words deserted him. What right did he have to ask her to come back? He'd failed to defend her, just like he'd failed to protect his wife that stormy night. The weight of his guilt pressed down on him, stealing his courage. A figure moved past the window, Marina wiping what looked like tears from her face. Damien's hand moved to the door handle, every fiber of his being urging him to go to her. Instead, he started the engine. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the darkness of his car. Then he pulled away from the curb, leaving Marina's light behind him, his chance at making things right fading with the evening sun. The drive back to the estate felt endless. Each mile marked another moment of weakness, another failure to do what needed to be done. The PR team's words echoed in his head, battling with the memory of his children's tears. Marina's gentle presence, the way his father had looked at him with disappointment when she left. At a red light, Damien's phone buzzed with another message from his crisis team. He ignored it, just as he ignored the gnawing certainty that he'd made another mistake by driving away from Marina's apartment. The light turned green, and he continued home, where silence waited to greet him once again. The next morning arrived with dark clouds and the distant rumble of thunder. Marina woke before her alarm, her sleep having been fitful and filled with dreams of 7 silent children. She dressed mechanically in her pale blue scrubs, trying to focus on the day ahead rather than the memories that threatened to overwhelm her. She arrived at the senior care facility just as the first raindrops began to fall. The early morning light filtered weakly through the gathering storm clouds, casting long shadows in the quiet hallways. Marina made her rounds, checking on her patients with practiced efficiency, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Around 8 o'clock, she heard familiar, distressed sounds coming from Mrs. Eleanor Thompson's room. The 87-year-old former schoolteacher often became agitated during storms, her dementia causing her to relive frightening moments from her past. Marina found Mrs. Thompson huddled in the corner of her room, trembling as lightning flashed outside her window. "The bombs!" the elderly woman whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "They're coming again." "Mrs. Thompson," Marina said softly, approaching with careful steps. "It's just a storm, sweetheart. You're safe here with me." The older woman looked up, confusion clouding her pale blue eyes. "But the sirens? That's just thunder," Marina explained gently, kneeling beside her. She reached out slowly and took Mrs. Thompson's weathered hand in hers. "Here, feel how warm and real my hand is. We're in Atlanta, in 2023. You're safe." Mrs. Thompson's grip tightened on Marina's hand as another thunderclap shook the windows. Marina began humming softly, an old hymn she remembered her grandmother singing during storms. Gradually, the tension began to ease from Mrs. Thompson's shoulders. "My Billy used to sing that," Mrs. Thompson murmured, her mind drifting to memories of her late husband. "He had such a beautiful voice." "Would you like to tell me about Billy?" Marina asked, helping Mrs. Thompson to her feet and guiding her back to her favorite chair. She wrapped a soft blanket around the elderly woman's shoulders as another flash of lightning illuminated the room. As Mrs. Thompson spoke about her husband, Marina listened attentively, though her own heart ached with fresh memories. She thought of quiet evenings in the Crown estate, of Emma's whispered "again" during story time, of Grace's soft mention of lavender. She thought of 7 pairs of eyes watching her, hopefully across the dinner table, of flower-covered counters and laughter during pizza-making, of Damien's tentative smile as he watched his children slowly coming back to life. The morning passed in a blur of medications, vital signs, and gentle conversations. Marina threw herself into her work, trying to convince herself that this was enough, that she could find fulfillment in these small acts of kindness, even if they didn't fill the growing emptiness in her heart. During her lunch break, she sat alone in the staff room, picking at a sandwich she couldn't taste. Her phone lay silent beside her, though she couldn't stop herself from checking it every few minutes. No messages, no calls. She wasn't sure what she was hoping for anymore. The afternoon storm had finally passed when Marina's shift ended at 4 o'clock. She gathered her things from her locker, ready to head home to another quiet evening alone. But as she walked into the lobby, she stopped short. Mr. Crown sat in one of the waiting room chairs, his cane resting against his knee. Despite his age, he cut an impressive figure, straight-backed and dignified, with the same striking features as his son. When he saw Marina, he stood carefully, leaning on his cane. "Marina," he said warmly, though his eyes were serious, "I hope you'll forgive an old man for ambushing you like this." Marina's heart thundered in her chest. "Mr. Crown, Please," he interrupted gently. "Just listen for a moment. The house has fallen apart since you left. The children—" He paused, his voice growing thick with emotion. "They've stopped speaking again. Eddie won't eat unless someone cuts his food the way you did. Emma cries herself to sleep asking for another story." Marina wrapped her arms around herself, fighting back tears. "I never meant to hurt them, but the situation, the headlines—" "To hell with the headlines," Mr. Crown said firmly. "What matters is family, and whether he realizes it or not, my son has found one with you." "Damien made his choice," Marina whispered, the pain of his silence still fresh. Mr. Crown shook his head. "No, my dear. My son made the same mistake he's been making since Sarah died, letting fear make his decisions for him. He reached out and took Marina's hand in his weathered one. Damien loves you. He's just too scared to admit it, too wrapped up in guilt to believe he deserves happiness again. Marina's breath caught in her throat. Love. I've watched him come alive again these past weeks. Mr. Crown continued. The way he looks at you when you're not watching, how he smiles when you make the children laugh. I haven't seen him that way since before Sarah's accident. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the storm making one last pass, as Marina struggled to find words. All I'm asking, Mr. Crown said gently, is that you give him a chance to explain, to make things right. The children need you, Marina, and so does he. Marina looked into Mr. Crown's kind eyes, seeing the same warmth she'd come to love in his grandchildren. After a long moment, she nodded. One conversation. She agreed softly. Mr. Crown's relief was palpable. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving slowly over the keys as he typed out a message. Within minutes, the lobby doors burst open, and Damien Crown rushed in, slightly out of breath, his usually impeccable suit wrinkled and his tie askew. He stopped a few feet from Marina, his eyes intense and determined, despite his disheveled appearance. The look on his face made Marina's heart skip. It was the same expression he'd worn when he'd first asked her to help his children, equal parts desperation and hope. Mr. Crown quietly excused himself, the tap of his cane fading down the hallway, leaving Marina and Damien standing alone in the lobby as the last rays of sun broke through the storm clouds outside. Damien gestured toward a quiet family room off the main lobby. Could we? He asked softly. Marina nodded, following him into the cozy space where she often met with patients' families. The familiar floral-patterned chairs and warm lighting usually brought comfort. But now her heart raced as she sat down across from him. For a long moment, Damien just looked at her, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I failed you, he said simply. I should have defended you the moment those stories came out. Should have told everyone the truth. That you're the most genuine, compassionate person I've ever met. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Instead, I let fear paralyze me, just like I've done ever since Sarah died. I was so afraid of making another mistake, of hurting the children again, that I made the biggest mistake of all. I let you walk away. Marina's throat tightened. The headlines, she started, were lies. Damien cut in firmly. Every word. You never tried to replace Sarah. You just brought life back into our home, made the children feel safe enough to speak again, made me remember what it feels like to... He paused, taking a shaky breath. To feel hope, to feel joy. His eyes met hers, vulnerable and earnest. I've been falling in love with you, Marina, not because you stepped into Sarah's role, but because of who you are. Your gentleness with Eddie when he's overwhelmed, your patience with Grace's walls, the way you notice every small victory and celebrate it, how you make everyone around you feel seen and valued. Tears spilled down Marina's cheeks as Damien continued, his voice growing stronger. The children ask for you every night. Emma won't go to sleep without asking if you'll be there tomorrow. Grace sits in the reading circle you created, holding one of your books. They need you. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. I need you. Then, with fierce clarity and steady devotion, he spoke the words that had changed everything that first day, but this time they held a deeper meaning. Marina, come home. I have 7 kids, and we all need you. Marina's heart broke open with relief and love. She wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. I need to see the children, she whispered. Right now. The evening sun cast long shadows across the driveway as Damien's car pulled up to the estate. Marina's hands trembled slightly in her lap, her heart beating faster as they approached the familiar iron gates. Before the car fully stopped, the front door burst open. 7 children spilled out onto the steps, their faces lighting up at the sight of Marina. Grace, usually so reserved, was the first to move. She rushed forward as Marina stepped out of the car, wrapping her arms tightly around Marina's waist. "You came back," Grace whispered, her voice thick with tears. Within seconds, the rest of the children swarmed around them. Little Eddie clutched Marina's legs while Emma tucked herself under Marina's arm. The twins pressed close on either side, and even the older boys joined the group hug, their eyes suspiciously bright. Laughter mixed with happy sobs filled the air. Marina knelt down, gathering as many children as she could into her arms. "I missed you all so much," she said softly, kissing foreheads and wiping tears. From the doorway, Damien watched the scene unfold, his own eyes glistening. The house seemed to come alive again, warmth returning to its halls with every giggle and whispered, "Welcome." Later, after stories were read and children were tucked into bed with extra tight hugs, Marina and Damien found themselves on the back patio. String lights twinkled overhead like stars, casting a gentle glow around them. "I don't want a nanny," Damien said quietly, turning to face her. "I want a partner, someone to share this life with, to help raise these children together. Someone I can cherish." He took her hand gently. "I want you, Marina." Marina's eyes filled with tears as she squeezed his hand. "I spent so long thinking I couldn't have a family," she whispered. "But maybe this is my miracle, finding one in my own unexpected way." The next morning dawned with golden sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows, warming the cheerful scene inside. The aroma of fresh pancakes filled the air as Marina stood at the stove, expertly flipping another perfectly golden circle while Eddie clung to her leg, giggling. "Can I have blueberries in mine?" Emma called out from her seat at the large wooden table. "Of course, sweetheart," Marina answered, dropping a handful of berries onto the sizzling batter. Damien leaned against the counter, coffee mug in hand, watching his once silent home bubble with conversation and laughter. The twins were arguing playfully over who would get the next pancake, while the older boys discussed their plans for a vegetable garden. After breakfast, Marina sat on the plush window seat with Grace, gently running a brush through the teenager's long, dark hair. "Would you like 2 braids or 1 today?" she asked softly. Grace leaned back against her. "2, please, like Mom used to do." Marina's fingers moved with careful tenderness, weaving the strands into neat plaits, while Grace hummed quietly, a sound that would have been unimaginable just weeks ago. Later in the morning, Marina found herself in the backyard, helping the older boys measure spaces for their garden plots. They marked off areas for tomatoes, peppers, and herbs, their excitement growing with each plan they made. During story time, Eddie crawled into Marina's lap, his small body fitting perfectly against hers as she read from his favorite picture book. The other children gathered around, even Grace, who usually thought herself too old for such things. In the warm afternoon sun, Damien knelt beside Marina on the soft grass, watching the children play. "We'll rebuild this family together," he promised quietly, taking her hand. "Day by day, with patience and love and faith." Marina squeezed his hand, her heart full. "Together," she agreed. As the golden hour approached, they gathered on the back porch for a family photo. Marina sat in a comfortable chair, surrounded by all 7 children. Eddie on her lap, the twins cross-legged at her feet, Grace standing close beside her, and the others arranged naturally around them. Damien stood behind, his hand resting warmly on Marina's shoulder. As the camera clicked, Marina felt tears of joy prick her eyes. She had spent years mourning what she thought she could never have, a family of her own. Yet here she was, surrounded by love, part of something bigger than herself. The impossible had become possible in the most unexpected way. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.